a nameless witness stepped out of the shadows with a presence that did not belong to the world of ordinary confessions. He emerged slowly, as if the darkness itself resisted letting him go, and for a suspended moment, he stood there like someone carrying a truth that had followed him too closely for too long. In the stillness, he revealed what he called the final words of Yu Menglong, words concealed beneath layers of secrecy so deliberate that their sudden appearance felt like an intrusion into a narrative that was never meant to be touched. These were not messages written for public eyes. These were fragments intended to be buried, fragments meant to disappear with the man who had spoken them. Yet they surfaced, undeniable and trembling with a weight that demanded to be heard. With that revelation, the entire story that many believed had reached its conclusion cracked open at the center, widening into something far more intricate than anyone had imagined. But behind the glamour and the excuses, what mechanisms are really driving this crisis? We will analyze every detail, from the initial mistakes to the irreversible damage, to see how the entertainment world works and how an icon is redefined. The witness chose a desolate, concrete underpass as the place to speak, a space lit by a single flickering bulb that cast shapes like restless memories along the walls. He did not arrive with protection or certainty. He arrived with hesitation stitched into every breath, the kind of hesitation that only comes from someone who has replayed the same moment repeatedly, hoping each time for a different outcome. He said that he had never intended to speak aloud what he heard. He had promised himself silence. He believed the truth was too sharp to expose, too dangerous to set loose. Yet something in him broke under the burden of carrying what did not belong to him. When he finally lowered himself onto a cold cement step, the world leaned forward as if the ground itself recognized the gravity of what was about to be set in motion. He described seeing Yu Menglong standing in a dim corridor, a corridor that should not have existed, illuminated only by a fractured light overhead. There was no fear in Yu Menglong's posture, no frantic trace of a man trying to fight his fate. Instead, there was a strange acceptance, a quiet resolve, as though he had already chosen the direction of his final steps long before the moment arrived. What unsettled the witness was not the silence around them, but the sense that the scene had been rehearsed somewhere beyond ordinary comprehension, as if Yu Menglong understood that someone would eventually uncover the truth and that these words would be the only guide left behind. The atmosphere grew heavier as the witness recounted the seconds before the revelation. His voice shook with the memory, with the echo of something that refused to fade. It was the moment when stillness turned into prophecy, when a man on the edge of disappearance spoke not to save himself, but to prepare the world for what waited on the other side of silence. The witness paused, as if reliving the gravity of that instant, and then said the words that would redefine everything that followed. What he said next would fracture the entire timeline forever. The witness described the beginning of everything with a clarity that felt almost unnatural, as if the memory had etched itself into him with the precision of a scar. He had not meant to be anywhere near Yu Menglong that night. His role was small, almost insignificant, a simple delivery that should have taken no more than a few seconds. Yet the envelope he carried bore a symbol that analysts would later recognize, a mark that appeared repeatedly across fragments of digital traces, forgotten notes, and encrypted files. At that moment, however, the witness knew nothing about its significance. He only knew that the task weighed heavier on his mind than it should have. He recalled walking through the dimly lit building, searching for the correct hallway, guided only by vague directions, and the uncomfortable sensation of moving through a space that felt abandoned too long. The floor carried a faint chill, the kind that clings to places where silence has settled in layers. He pressed forward, unaware that he was stepping toward a threshold that would later split the narrative of Yu Menglong into two distinct eras, before the words were spoken and after. What drew him deeper was not a sense of purpose, but a mistake. He pushed a misaligned panel, expecting nothing more than the thud of solid material, yet the wall yielded with a mechanical shift, revealing a hidden corridor. At first, he believed it was an old utility passage left behind after renovations. It looked forgotten, narrow, and unsettling in its stillness. He almost turned back, but the envelope in his hand compelled him forward, as if he needed to know whether this secret place connected to the person he had come to meet. When he stepped inside, the air felt dense, as though the hallway itself was holding its breath. A single fractured light overhead flickered with a rhythm that did not feel accidental. It illuminated only fragments of the space, leaving the rest in shadows that stretched unnaturally across the walls. He took a slow step, then another, each one followed by an echo that did not belong to the quietness of an empty corridor. That was when he saw two silhouettes at the far end, one unmistakably belonging to Yu Menglong. The witness said that Yu Menglong stood with an unusual calm, the type of calm seen in individuals who have accepted a path with no return. His posture carried resolve, not defiance. His expression revealed a focus that suggested he had already chosen what to reveal and what to take with him into the silence. Opposite him stood a figure cloaked in a long coat, rigid in posture, positioned like someone accustomed to command rather than conversation. Their interaction did not resemble an argument. It resembled an exchange of gravity. The witness strained to listen, compelled by a force he could not explain. He sensed no fear in Yu Menglong's voice. Instead, he sensed a man who had reached a point of unspoken clarity, the kind forged when someone realizes that silence would carry far greater cost than truth. There was an eerie stillness between them, a quiet charged with the weight of a secret that had traveled too long in the dark. Each word grew heavier as the witness recalled the moment, because it was there, in that dim and forgotten corridor, that the foundation of everything began to shift. The envelope in the witness's hand felt suddenly connected to the tension unfolding before him. The unseen symbol, the mysterious corridor, the presence of a figure whose identity he dared not reveal, and the expression on Yu Menglong's face all converged into a moment that felt deliberately orchestrated. The witness understood then, even before the final words emerged, that Yu Menglong was not acting out of desperation. He was acting out of intention. What followed next would not only transform the witness, but set the entire world in motion toward answers it was not prepared to confront. What followed would ignite a reaction more powerful than anyone expected. What do you think about this? Comment Amen below so we can continue with the unfinished stories. The moment the witness stepped forward with his account, the world reacted as if struck by a force that had been waiting beneath the surface, tense and coiled. His testimony did not spread slowly. It detonated. The story rippled through digital platforms, private circles, and investigative groups with a velocity that turned speculation into wildfire. What had been a quiet curiosity surrounding Yu Menglong's disappearance now surged into a storm that refused containment. People were not simply listening, they were searching, dissecting, and reassembling every fragment of his story, desperate to find coherence in the shadows he left behind. Investigators were the first to feel the tremor. For months, they had worked with incomplete data, piecing together a timeline full of gaps that refused to close. They had combed through surveillance logs, device backups, and encrypted storage, yet none of it formed a narrative strong enough to challenge the official assumptions. However, the witness's account altered everything in a single moment. What startled the investigative team was not only the nature of his claims, but how precisely they aligned with three elements they had never intended to reveal to the public. A hidden map traced from an obscure cloud backup. A corrupted audio file that resisted every attempt at decryption. A torn scrap of paper recovered from a drawer in Yu Menglong's apartment. All three contained the same haunting phrase, "the last place you would not look." Once the public learned of this connection, speculation turned into obsession. Analysts began constructing diagrams that mapped the symbol engraved on the mysterious envelope to unrelated sightings across unrelated documents. Fans sifted through old interviews, searching for micro-expressions or symbolic gestures that might hint at hidden distress. Some insisted they heard coded patterns in the rhythm of his older voice notes, while others tracked shifting details in background objects from his recorded appearances. As theories multiplied, online communities split into factions, each convinced they had uncovered the real interpretation of Yu Menglong's final message. One faction argued that he had concealed a physical object, something substantial enough to destabilize the narrative surrounding his disappearance. Another believed he had hidden a digital confession, encrypted so deeply that only the right sequence of clues would unlock it. A smaller but increasingly vocal group proposed that he had entrusted the truth to a person rather than a place. To them, the phrase "last place you would not look" was not geographical at all. It was personal. It pointed to someone too close to the center of the story to ever be suspected. Despite the growing noise, the witness maintained a distinction that unsettled even the most thorough analysts. He emphasized that Yu Menglong's tone never suggested he was guarding an object. Instead, it suggested he was exposing a betrayal. This shift in interpretation reframed the entire conversation. If betrayal was at the core, then the location of the truth was secondary. The real question became, who benefited from silence, and who would be destroyed if it ended? The media amplified this shift with relentless momentum. Articles appeared hourly, each one dissecting new angles or recontextualizing old data. Talk shows hosted experts in symbolism, behavioral psychology, and forensic reconstruction. Every guest claimed to see a different layer hidden beneath his final words. Rumors spread faster than corrections could reach them. Even insiders, previously insulated by confidentiality, found themselves pulled into the public vortex, contacted by strangers demanding answers or validation. The more they resisted, the more convinced people became that something monumental was buried beneath institutional restraint. Yet, amid the chaos, one detail stood out. The encrypted audio file remained completely inaccessible, despite attempts by multiple specialists. Its existence suggested deliberate intent, not accidental corruption. It also reinforced the idea that Yu Menglong had orchestrated his clues with precision, anticipating that only when the right witness stepped forward would the pieces align into a coherent picture. His structure, although fragmented, appeared purposeful. It pointed toward a revelation larger than any single clue could offer. It hinted at a design. As public pressure intensified, investigators found themselves forced into transparency they had initially avoided. They reopened timelines, re-examined the spaces surrounding his final movements, and interviewed individuals who had previously offered nothing of value. Everything the witness had revealed began to intersect with old uncertainties, forming pathways that demanded to be followed, no matter where they led. The narrative was no longer contained within closed rooms or classified reports. It had expanded outward into the hands of millions, each person contributing to the gravitational pull dragging the truth toward the surface. And as the noise of the world rose, one unsettling realization emerged. Every answer revealed another question waiting beneath it. What do you think about this? Comment "Amen" below so we can continue with the unfinished stories. The deeper investigators pushed into the tangled threads of Yu Menglong's final hours, the more the narrative bent into shapes that resisted traditional logic. The corridor described by the witness became the center of this transformation, a place that existed only in memory and fear. Architectural records showed no sign of it. Renovation logs offered no explanation. Maintenance schematics ignored it entirely. Yet the witness had stood there, trembling in the half-light, watching a conversation that seemed suspended outside the boundaries of reality. This contradiction formed the darkest hour of the investigation, the moment when the story detached from the comfort of documented truth and entered a realm shaped by deliberate erasure. The investigators returned to the building quietly, walking through the same floor where the witness had wandered by accident. They traced each panel, each corner, testing mechanical seams that should not have moved. Most revealed nothing but the cold rigidity of metal. Yet certain sections produced faint vibrations, as if something beneath the surface pulsed with stored memory. For an entire night, they listened to the building breathe, waiting for the structure to betray itself. Nothing happened. The corridor remained a ghost, as elusive as the identity of the figure who had stood with Yu Menglong beneath the flickering light. Its absence did not disprove the witness. It amplified him. A place that should not exist but did exist in someone's story suggested intention rather than coincidence. Meanwhile, the significance of the metallic object grew heavier. The witness had described its glint with unsettling clarity, a small piece of engraved metal handed from the unidentified figure to Yu Menglong with a gesture that resembled a final transaction. Analysts who studied the symbol found on the object noted its resemblance to the one buried in his locked phone weeks earlier. It was not merely decorative. It was part of a sequence, a repeating pattern appearing across physical artifacts, digital remnants, and whispered testimony. Symbols rarely behave that way by accident. They behave like signatures, marking the presence of someone who wanted to be unseen yet unmistakable. The breakthrough began when investigators, following the witness's description, reconstructed the final exchange in the hidden corridor. They imagined the rigid posture of the cloaked figure, the resolve in Yu Menglong's eyes, and the quiet intensity between them. The witness had reported no fear in Yu Menglong's demeanor. Instead, he observed resignation shaped by purpose. This observation forced investigators to question every assumption surrounding his final hours. If he was not panicked, if he was not attempting escape, then what was he preparing for? The question grew sharper when they revisited his words. Make sure they see the truth before they bury it. A statement like that did not belong to a man facing randomness. It belonged to someone anticipating an outcome he could not prevent. This realization reframed the entire mystery. The unknown figure was not an intruder in Yu Menglong's story. They were a participant. The object was not a warning. It was a message. And the corridor was not a coincidence. It was a chosen stage. As investigators walked through the implications, the climax arrived quietly, forming itself from a detail nearly overlooked. The witness had said that after the metallic object changed hands, the atmosphere shifted. The flickering light above them pulsed violently, as though reacting to the exchange. This was not a supernatural observation. It pointed to a sensor, a timed mechanism, a dormant system triggered by proximity or signal. If true, it meant that the corridor had been designed for controlled encounters, not accidents. It also meant that Yu Menglong had been expected there. The precision suggested orchestration, and orchestration suggested complicity. From this moment, the narrative pivoted. The truth was no longer framed as something he hid. It became something he released in pieces, trusting that someone else would assemble them after his voice fell silent. Fragment by fragment, he had scattered clues in spaces no one would examine unless forced to look. The building, the symbol, the message, the object, and the witness all formed a constellation pointing toward a revelation intentionally delayed. Only when all of them converged did the investigators understand the scale of what had been unfolding beneath the surface. And yet, even with every discovery, an absence remained. The truth felt close, but not complete, as though one critical piece continued to hover just beyond reach, waiting to fall into place. The investigators stood at the threshold of understanding, sensing that the mystery was expanding rather than shrinking, that Yu Menglong had constructed something far larger than a farewell. If the truth is really hidden in the last place no one would look, then the real story has not even started. The aftermath of the witness's testimony unfolded like a slow turning tide, reshaping the landscape of everything the world believed it understood about Yu Menglong. His final words no longer existed as a fading memory sealed within a corridor that should not have existed. They had transformed into a force that pushed investigators, analysts, and ordinary viewers toward a deeper reckoning with the story that had been obscured by shadows for far too long. What began as a whisper from a frightened stranger grew into a collective pursuit of meaning, each person drawn to the unanswered spaces in his message, compelled by the quiet certainty that he had left far more behind than a single night's encounter. In every discussion, whether whispered in private or amplified across public platforms, one question persisted. What was the truth he no longer had the strength to carry alone? The phrase he repeated, "the last place you would not look," lingered over every theory, suggesting a design more intricate than a hidden location or object. It hinted at a system of clues that demanded attention, not through spectacle, but through patience and willingness to confront uncomfortable possibilities. The more people searched for tangible evidence, the more apparent it became that the truth existed in layers, shaped as much by intention as by fear. As investigators revisited timelines and reconstructed fragments of his final steps, they confronted an unavoidable tension. Yu Menglong did not behave like someone who had stumbled into danger. He behaved like someone who had walked toward it with the understanding that his voice would continue after he disappeared. This realization reshaped the narrative from tragedy to strategy, from the collapse of a life to the deliberate unfolding of a message. It forced the world to see him not only as a victim of circumstances, but as an architect of revelation guiding others toward what he could not state openly. Yet buried beneath these discoveries was a quieter truth, one that resonated beyond the mystery of the corridor and the symbol. It was the truth of the man grappling with the weight of isolation in a world that demanded silence from those who wished to expose the fragile structures of power. Fame had given him visibility, but not protection. Influence had given him reach, but not safety. In the end, what he chose to leave behind was not a map or a confession, but a call for vigilance, a reminder that the cost of looking away is often greater than the cost of confronting the unknown. This story, shaped by shadows and fragments, urges the world to examine the space where vulnerability intersects with courage. It asks whether truth is ever truly lost, or merely waiting for the right moment to rise. As observers, investigators, and fans continue to trace the patterns he left, they stand at the threshold of an unfinished message, sensing that the final revelation has not yet surfaced. And perhaps that was always his intention. But if the unanswered pieces were truly designed to surface later, then the world may be standing at the edge of a revelation far greater than anyone has imagined.